solar farm in Badgerlands. We have Regan Lefebvre to do a presentation. Did you want to open it up or start?
Your worship, thank you very much. I'm happy to go right to Regan if you're
okay. There he
Good
is.
afternoon, Your Worship and Council. Hello.
Thanks for joining us.
I'll just share my screen here. Just hold on 1 second. I don't seem to have the ability to share my screen.
Do we have to give him? I think this might be a presentation we want to see.
Oh, there we go. It just popped up. All right. Can everyone see that now?
We sure can.
Okay. So the contents of the presentation, I'm going to go through some of the background and then talk about our existing rooftop solar, a little bit of history on the Badgerlands, and then talk through the solar farm concept from what it originated, and then some of the compliance issues that we've run into. I'll talk a little bit about municipal own use generation as well as the hybrid solar farm, and then the analysis that we've done with ATCO and Boost on the commercial solar farm. And then we've done additional analysis. A lot of that's been internal, but we did rely on ATCO and Boost for the municipal own use generation as well as the hybrid solar farm options. I've got an overall economic analysis and then some discussion of some additional costs, risks, and considerations, some other solar farm options, and then potentially the future of the Badgerlands. So to start with, alignment with strategic priorities. This project actually started off solely as a revenue generating infrastructure opportunity. It was in our current strategic priority 5. There was obviously an environmental component to it, so it does touch into strategic priority 4, which is the green environment strategy as well as resilient infrastructure. And then the latest one that I've added to this is actually our economic prosperity strategic priority, which is the St. Albert West Area Structure Plan, as well as the integration of annexed lands into the city technical plans and studies. And I'll get into those a little bit later. But for the public engagement, we've done significant public engagement for this project. We've got Cultivate the Conversation website as well as a survey that I think everyone's aware of. Pivotal Research is in attendance if there's any questions regarding the public engagement. And we also have Matt Clark, Brandon Goy, and Michael Lazinski in attendance. Matt and Brandon are with ATCO, and Michael Lazinski is with Boost Energy Ventures. If there's any questions on the reports that were provided to council late last week. So talking about the background, so St. Albert's electricity usage, we have 249 plus electrified sites. Some of the sites are combined, like all of our street lighting is one account. So we have more than 249, but we have 249 registered sites. And our total usage is 22,300 megawatt hours per year, or 22,300,000 kilowatt hours per year. And if you look at an average household in Alberta, 7,200 kilowatt hours is the average usage. So our municipal facilities consume the equivalent of about 3,100 Alberta homes. Our existing rooftop solar, so we've got the Des Leggett, which it's 0.3 megawatts DC, and that was completed in 2017. The first year, it only started operations in late November, so we only had 500 kilowatt hours that were produced there. In 2018, it was 285,000 kilowatt hours, and then 281,000 kilowatt hours in 2019. We had a bad year in 2020. The system was down for maintenance from July to October, so we only got 165,000 that year. But in 2021, we're back up mostly to where we were, and that's 267,000 kilowatt hours. We had some snow coverage and a little bit of maintenance downtime there as well in 2021. Jackcraft is a newer installation. It's similar in size, so 0.29 megawatts DC. The first partial year we had 10,000 kilowatt hours, and then the first full year of production, 292,000 kilowatt hours. And then the largest installation that we have is Service Place, which is 1.11 megawatts DC, and we don't have any annual production data on this one yet because it was completed late last year. But I've done some projections based on the actuals for our existing, as well as some data from NRCan. This is the actual production numbers here in the yellow. And the orange is our total grid consumption. So the blue is our total electricity consumption. So projecting forward and looking at the percentage of our total usage, we could say that green electricity as a percentage, when we had Des Leggett operating by itself, we're at about 1.29% green electricity that was being produced and consumed at our city facilities. And then 1.29% again as well for 2019. 2020, when we had that down year, we were down to 0.92%. 2021, with both Jackcraft and Deslegate, we're at 2.71%. And we expect we're going to be at 6.7% this year with the service place installation coming online, and that will decline over time. The solar panels do degrade over time, so that's built into these projections. The degradation of the solar panels, so that will drop over time. I did a bit of a cost benefit analysis on service place as well, looking at a 30-year life expectancy. Our current municipal price for electricity, 2% inflation, some additional assumptions you can see there, our capital costs and what we received in grant funding for the project. And back then our capital, our cost of borrowing was 2.4% on a 30-year debenture that was at the end of 2020. So based on all those inputs, the cost benefit analysis comes out very close to even. If you look at a net present value, we're slightly losing money because money that we're gaining in the future is worth less than money that is worth today. But when this is just based on the cost of electricity by itself, this analysis. So when you build in the value of green electricity, so renewable energy certificates or RECs, people purchase those or companies purchase those in order to reduce their environmental footprint. So green electricity has a higher value on the market than does, I'll call it regular electricity or electricity that's produced from natural gas sources. And when you assign the typical value to the green electricity, then we get a positive IRR, and it's actually higher than what our capital cost was at the time. So you could say that this maybe wasn't a great investment if you don't consider value in the green electricity, or we didn't get the grant. But between the grant and placing value on the green electricity, I project a positive IRR for this installation. So now I'll talk a little bit about the Badgerlands. So the site itself was acquired in 2005. And there's been a lot of debate over the years about potential uses, from affordable housing, libraries were talked about there, potential church, commercial site, schools, parkland. It was also recreation was a key one, and then municipal operations. And because nothing was decided, I guess in the interim, as the default, municipal operations have made a lot of use of the site. So I think everyone's aware of the compost transfer station for the mulching of wood waste prior to being hauled away. We've also got some storage, so materials, excess materials from some of our larger capital projects are stored there, as well as our street sweeping materials before those are disposed at landfill. The excess construction materials are actually reused. So there's some big, I guess we call it some green environmental benefits out of reusing some of that excess construction material. We're doing landfill diversion rather than taking that to a landfill and then purchasing additional materials in future years. We're able to reuse some of that material. We've also got some drying sites. The material that's removed from excavations as well as our OGIs is dried at a series of bins. And then we've got our hydrovac excavation, so materials that are removed. So this is just regular soil materials. The CB and OGI drying material ends up getting hauled to landfill, but we're able to reduce the cost of that disposal by doing the drying on the site. The hydrovac excavation materials are suitable for reuse, so we're able to reuse those in other small capital projects within the utilities group. So we also have the snow storage area, and you can see there's this berm that runs along the perimeter of that area. This area is still being used for stormwater retention for the site. So during the rainfall events, that's where the ponding has occurred, and that's part of what's made it difficult to do the environmental site assessment and get some good data on those low-lying areas, because they're underwater for a good portion of the year. So and I think over this last winter they were able to get some good samples and data from those low-lying areas. There's also a portion of the site that's, I would say, not utilized. I mean, there's obviously trees, but for city municipal operations, this western portion here where the old CN rail bed used to be is not currently utilized. The commercial solar farm was initially, the initial concept was as a stimulus project, and the thought was it would provide revenue to the city of St. Albert from the sale of electricity to the grid. It was thought to be a way for the city of St. Albert to participate in Alberta's transition from coal to renewable energy. It was thought of as a way to make use of a brownfield site as well that had apparently limited development potential. It was known that power generation is a competitive, capital-intensive industry in Alberta, but it was assumed that the site's close proximity to an electrical substation, provincial and federal grants, and the city's access to low-cost financing would be able to make a strong business case for the project. The concept started off as a utility-scale solar farm occupying the northernmost 1/3 of the Badgerlands. But as they were going through their due diligence, or as we were going through the due diligence, it was found that while solar farms are scalable, I mean, doubling the size of the solar farm roughly doubles the cost, there are advantages to building larger facilities. The application and connection fees are typically the same, regardless of the size. The regulatory approval costs, which can be significant, are also the same, regardless of the size. And the mobilization costs are the same, regardless of the size. So for these reasons, the concept for the St. Albert Solar Farm was increased to occupy almost the full site of the Badgerlands. And also for these reasons, while phasing was considered, it was also found to be not economical. It's better to build it all at once than to try and build it in 3 phases, staggered out over 5 or 10 years. Through the due diligence, it also became apparent that the deregulated power generation industry is difficult for municipalities to participate. The Electrical Utilities Act actually prohibits municipalities from owning generation facilities unless strict criteria are met. The EUA requires that municipally owned generating units, including those owned by a corporation controlled by the municipality, must be structured in a manner that prevents any tax advantage, subsidy, or financial advantage, or any other indirect benefit as a result of association with the municipality or subsidiary. There's also a payment in lieu of tax regulation, and that requires payments to the AESO for municipally owned generation facilities that's equivalent to the municipal, federal, provincial income tax exemptions that municipalities enjoy in order to comply with Section 95 of the EUA. So we've interpreted all these requirements as follows. We'd have to make this payment to the AESO in lieu of federal and provincial taxes. It's also known as a balancing pool payment. The facility must make an equivalent payment to the City of St. Albert in lieu of municipal taxes. The facility must make a payment to the City of St. Albert for the lease of the land. The facility must not have access to preferential municipal financing. The City of St. Albert must be able to demonstrate that it is not subsidizing a commercial solar farm through municipal operations. And then the latest one is, this was actually a new one to us, is that federal and provincial grants that are only available to municipalities are also considered by the province to be a municipal subsidy. And we found this out because several municipally owned solar farms in Alberta were recently assessed by the MSA, the Market Surveillance Administrator, and they received a notice, and that was issued on May 13th of just this year. They used their Alberta Municipal Solar Program grants to construct small commercial solar installations. And the MSA found that several of these facilities were not compliant with either the EUA or the MOUG regulation. According to the MSA, municipally owned generation facilities that are constructed using federal and provincial grants that are only available to municipalities are considered to have received a municipal subsidy. But because the facilities were small, less than 5 megawatts, the MSA chose to issue a forbearance. It's like an exception rather than to issue penalties in these circumstances. Provided we meet the same criteria, it's expected the MSA would likely consider the St. Albert's commercial solar farm as non-compliant unless we also obtain a forbearance. And to obtain a forbearance, they list the criteria. So you have to apply for it. It must be located within the boundaries of your municipality. It must be smaller than 5 megawatts, and the generating municipality must not exercise offer control over the AMSP units. So as a result of the legislation, we've made the following adjustments to the commercial solar farm. So we expect that a municipal utility corporation would satisfy the requirements of EUA Section 90 to demonstrate that non-subsidization. We expect that the requirement of a lease payment between COSA and the COSA MUC would provide separate revenue for the city for municipal taxes and the lease payment based on the agricultural land value. And that would eliminate any advantage in financing and eliminate any municipal advantage that a municipally owned commercial solar farm might have. We also cannot use grants that are not available to the private industry in the case of a commercial solar farm. We'd also, I think back in February, we had discussed with council looking at the municipal own use generation solar farm. So this is before this, we became aware that that federal and provincial grants would be considered or are considered municipal subsidies by the MSA. We were actually looking at the possibility of a smaller scale solar farm as well at the Badgerlands. The municipal own use generation regulation, it provides an exemption for situations where municipalities do not need to meet the requirements of the Electric Utilities Act. So these facilities are exempt from making that equivalent payment to the ASO in lieu of federal and provincial taxes. The facility is also exempt from needing to make municipal tax payments. We wouldn't need to charge the facility for a lease of the land. We could access preferential municipal financing, and we don't need to demonstrate that we're not subsidizing it either. An MUC would not be required, and we can obtain grants that are specific to municipalities. But what we do have to do in order to qualify for MOUGs, we have to demonstrate that we're consuming the electricity. All of the electricity being produced is also being consumed at municipal facilities. The third concept that we looked at was for a hybrid solar farm. So that was a 2/3 commercial and a 1/3 municipal own use generation. And that's what we've taken forward with the design. This is the design that ATCO's brought forward to us. So there's a total of 6 arrays here. 2 are south of Future Fowler Way and 4 are to the north of Future Fowler Way. The north portion is 12.6 megawatts DC with an AC rating of 10 megawatts, and the south portion, which would be municipal own use generation, has a DC rating of 6.2 megawatts and an AC rating of 4.95. So combined, it's 17.8 megawatts DC and 14.95 megawatts AC. And that's approximately 6 times the size of the Service Place installation. And the expected production is more than 27 times that of Service Place. And that's because of the optimized tilt angle that we have with a solar farm, as well as we're planning to use bifacial panels as part of the design. So ATCO's taken the solar design to 90% for the electrical and heavy civil. The current design could be used to obtain the remaining approvals. There is some remaining design work, and it's not just 10%. There's some additional items such as the foundation design that still needs to be completed, and that can be done in advance of procurement, or it could be assigned to a design builder as a DB procurement. The estimated capital costs, however, have increased from 22.5 million to 32.4 million, which that does not include the application fees, the interconnection fees, as well as the contingency budget. So as I said, that's a big increase in the capital cost. That's a 47% increase. What we've been seeing in the industry is that the cost of cables has increased significantly. The cost of inverters has also increased significantly, and the cost of the racking has increased. For instance, the price of steel has nearly doubled since just last year. We've also increased the cost to evenly grade the site and to ensure proper drainage. But the solar farm has also gotten bigger, so that's not just a strictly it's not just a strict increase based on inflation. The other factor is the fact that the solar farm itself has gotten bigger. The panels have increased from 530 watt to 540 watt. More panels have been added to the site. We've gone from 28,000 panels to just under 35,000. So our total DC rating has actually increased from 15.1 megawatts to 18.1 megawatts. And the specific production has increased from 1352 kilowatt hours per kilowatt P to 1440 kilowatt hours per kilowatt P. And that's just as a result of some better data that ATCO was able to obtain from other facilities that are using these bifacial panels. So we're projecting higher production as well. And with all of these changes together, the projected output of the solar farm has increased by about 35%. Unfortunately, what we've been seeing is the long-term PPA pricing, the power purchase agreement pricing for solar electricity has not really increased since last year. While we've seen increases in the spot power prices, in their latest quarterly report, the MSA indicated that solar electricity is getting about 12.5 cents per kilowatt hour, and that was for Q2 of 2022, and that's about a 5% premium over the average pool price. However, as more large-scale solar production is added to the system, as well as rooftop solar reducing the demand during these same periods, Boost is predicting that the premium that solar electricity has historically received and is currently receiving will be eliminated in the future. And solar electricity in the future will be discounted compared to the average pool price. So we'll be getting a lower price than what the average pool price is. And that's getting built into those long-term PPA prices. So due to the extended payback period now, Boost has proposed a 30-year PPA rather than what they had previously recommended was a 12-year PPA. And PPAs typically provide lower pricing than the power pool with a lower risk. But previously we were looking at higher pricing towards the back end because in those initial 12 years, we would be just about paying off the debenture. Now we're looking at close to 30 years before we're able to pay off the debenture due to the higher capital costs and the higher costs overall. So. And the loss of the grants is another big one because we now know that municipal own use grants are no longer available for the project in order to comply with the EUA. The project does need to make lease payments to the city to comply with the EUA, but that's still revenue to the city. It's just we need to make that as a separate payment. So it's revenue to the city. It's just not revenue to the project. So it's a cost to the project. Municipalities no longer have access to the Alberta Capital Finance Authority, which has increased our financing costs by about 1%. Ideally, the project should stay cash positive with the revenue exceeding the debt payments as much as possible. And we're needing now to look at 30-year financing rather than 15-year financing for the project. And interest rates in general are higher than last year. So whereas previously we were looking at about $6.5 million in interest charges over the life of the project, that's 26.1 million financed at 3% over 15 years. Now we're looking at 36.1 million in interest charges. So that's 35.6 million financed at 4.7% over 30 years. So our financing costs are more than 4 times what they were previously, due to all the reasons that I just talked about on the previous page. So when you look at the cumulative cash flow, this was provided to us by Boost. The blue line is actually the project itself. So in the initial years, we would make a little bit of money, and then there's the cost to replace the inverters at about the year 2037 or 2038. We have to replace the inverters, and then our production is also going to be declining. So with the declining production and declining revenue, we expect that the project would break even from the municipal's perspective with those tax payments as well as the lease payments. But when you look at it from the project itself, we expect that we would lose $3 million over the life of the project in a cumulative free cash flow. The black line would be if we did not need to borrow. So that's if we were financing this with cash as an unlevered development. So looking again at municipal own use generation, so our analysis there, so we would need to have interval meters. What we've learned is we need to have interval meters at all of the sites in order to demonstrate compliance with MOUG. We already have 5 sites that have interval meters, so on an hourly basis, we're able to read what the meter readings are. And we did an analysis based on the 2018 consumption at these 5 sites. We also looked at adding interval meters to an additional 8 sites. So these are the sites with the next highest consumption that we have. So in total, these 13 sites actually have 17,409,000 kilowatt hours of usage. That's about 80% of our total consumption. So I mentioned we had 249 plus sites. These 13 sites represent 80% of the electricity that's consumed in the city at our municipal facilities. So we look back at 2018, what our consumption looked like using the 5 interval meter data from the 5 interval meters that we had, and then we extrapolated that to the additional 8 sites. Looking at this is what our consumption looks like at these sites throughout the year. So you can see between 1 megawatt hour and between 2.5 megawatt hours. Our consumption is pretty flat throughout the year. So this is obviously probably the difference between daytime and nighttime, but we don't drop down to 0 very often. You can see these little blips here. These are likely power outages we expect. So there's likely a small power outage here and a larger power outage back in 2018. And we chose 2018. We had a few years of data. We chose 2018 because that was pre Jackcraft solar, and it was also pre-service place solar, and it was also pre-COVID. We were seeing some obviously discrepancies through COVID at our facilities, some reductions in the electricity usage at the municipal facilities. So we thought we had better data going back historically to 2018. So we then compared that data from the consumption with what the production would be from a 4.9 megawatt AC municipal own use generation solar farm. So, and we found that the production in the summertime greatly exceeds what our consumption is because we're pretty flat throughout the year. We don't have significantly increased consumption through the summer. Basically, we'd be non-compliant with the municipal own use generation regulation about 17% of the time. And as you can see, we'd be significantly non-compliant. We would be producing about double the amount of electricity at some hours of the year than what we'd be consuming. So we did a similar analysis looking at a 2 megawatt AC solar farm. And here we were only non-compliant about 1% of the time. And some of that was those power outages. We went back to the MSA and just just discussed whether that was an issue. And they said in extenuating circumstances such as power outages, they don't expect compliance with the MOUG regulation. So they take that into consideration. And in addition to this, we would also have our additional 20% hourly usage at our other sites. Just because we don't have interval meters, we can use those to demonstrate compliance. So we think this would be about the size of a municipal own use generation solar farm that we would need to be in order to be compliant with the MOUG regulation. But like I said, this was 2018. So this was pre the service place installation and pre the Jackcraft installation. We expect that would actually reduce by at least 1 megawatt. Those installations would actually reduce the amount of available consumption we'd have to use for a municipal own use generation solar farm facility. And if we were to go ahead with a municipal own use generation solar farm, it would actually make the business case more difficult for additional rooftop solar installations in the city, because they would have the possibility of putting our solar farm out of compliance with MOUG. So this is the economic analysis results that Boost put together for us. So we've got our reference case, which was the commercial solar farm for 14.95 megawatts, and that's with the balancing pool payment. And without any grant funding, so we've taken that to zero, and with our revised capital costs, we're now looking at a 1.8% IRR. And then when you factor in the municipal taxes that we'd be receiving in that lease payment, our IRR would be 4.1%. So, and in order for an investment to be considered a good investment, typically your IRR has to exceed your cost of capital, your cost of borrowing, and in this case, it does not. And actually, none of the cases does our IRR exceed what our costs of capital are. So none of these three cases that we took a hard look at would be considered a good investment, even when you consider what we'd be receiving in municipal taxes. The best case was actually the hybrid, because the hybrid was able to take advantage of the economies of scale of the larger solar farm, and it was also to take advantage of the available grant funding. So talking about some green considerations for the project, because that's obviously a consideration. The carbon intensity of solar PV is significantly lower than natural gas, oil, or coal. And this is coming from the EPA website, and they took an average of about 50 sources in order to obtain this. So it is not zero, though, and that's one of the things that we got from the feedback in some of the public engagement, was that solar PV isn't zero, and that is correct. So it isn't net zero completely, but it is substantially lower in terms of carbon footprint or carbon intensity than natural gas, oil, or coal. But for this project, unlike the rooftop solar installations, the solar farm concept was never intended to reduce St. Albert's carbon footprint. It was initially proposed strictly as a revenue generating opportunity. And a significant component of that revenue is from the sale of the green attributes. And so that's included within that cost analysis. Was we'd actually be selling the green attributes to somebody else as either renewable energy credits or RECs, which can be used by other customers that would be willing to pay this premium in order to reduce their own carbon footprint. Green attributes can also be sold alternatively as carbon offsets, and companies can use those to reduce the amount of carbon tax that they pay. So a natural gas power generation facility, for instance, could use the carbon offsets from within Alberta. They can use the carbon offsets from a solar farm in order to reduce the amount of carbon tax that they pay due to their carbon emissions. So the City of Edmonton recently announced the purchase of RECs to reduce their carbon footprint by 30%. And the City of Edmonton also has a goal for city operations to achieve a target of 100% renewable energy by 2040. The environmental site assessment, on a similar, I guess, note, when we're talking about the environmental footprint, we have the ESA report looking at the Badgerlands and looking at those salt impacted soils. That report did not identify a significant risk to human health, wildlife, or environment based on the findings and the potential pathways. The city's risk appears to be minimal currently, provided the city restricts the uses of the site to those that are appropriate based on the results. For instance, no shallow domestic consumption water wells, etc. The city's risk can be further mitigated by maintaining ownership of the salt impacted portion of the site and continuing with the risk management plan. Provided the city does not sell the north, so not all of these are the recommendations of the consultant. This is some of my own, I guess, reading into that ESA. So, provided the city does not sell the north third of the Badger lands, the city may not need to remediate. This likely limits the uses of a portion of the property to non-residential. And it should be noted that there are no environmental concerns currently identified for the southern portion of the Badger lands. So those south of Fowler Way, those have not been impacted by the salt contaminated soils, and not impacted. The groundwater to the south of Fowler Way has not been impacted either. The current estimates for remediation are in the order of $4.5 million. Remediation of the salt impacted soil is not needed for the development of the solar farm, and no costs for remediation are currently included in the project costs. However, the corrosion effects were considered in the design of the screw piles. The development of the solar farm does require leveling the site by moving fill from the higher areas to the lower elevation areas, and providing some grading for drainage. But effectively, when we do that, we would be burying the salt impacted soils within the low-lying areas. We'd then be adding screw piles to these areas, potentially introducing new pathways for the salt to enter the groundwater. There is a risk that we could actually be increasing the remediation costs or limiting the potential uses of the site in the future if we were to proceed with the solar farm. Offsite levies are another consideration. The city's offsite levy bylaw actually requires several $1 million in offsite levies to be paid at the time of subdivision or development of the Badger lands. And the city council does have the authority to make the Badger lands, or preferably solar farms in general, exempt from paying offsite levies. However, what this would do is it would actually increase the offsite levies for other developers, particularly for the infrastructure that's already been built and intended to service the Badger lands. There is some specific oversizing that was constructed for sanitary and stormwater in order to service the Badger lands, which was previously a priority of councils of the day. Offsite shared infrastructure that is constructed for urban development needs all benefiting lands to pay their fair share in order to maintain reasonable offsite levy rates. So the offsite levy program then in turn needs to collect the funds from these benefiting lands as they are developed in order to fund new infrastructure in order to support further growth. Another consideration is increased servicing costs for the annexation lands, and this is a fairly new one. This is what I was speaking about earlier. In the original solar farm concept, the Badger lands were actually on the edge of the city, and they were on the outer boundary of the city of St. Albert. But when we annexed all of these additional lands, now we need to extend services to them in order. The intent is that these are going to become urbanized lands and part of the city of St. Albert, and developed in an urban framework. So the only way to service the lands to the west of Badger lands, or I guess the most reasonable way to service these lands to the west of the Badger lands, which are a key property, is from the Badger lands itself. Water servicing cannot be extended to the Badger lands with the current utility master plan does not have water coming from the south to the north, because these are lower elevation lands. As you move further south, these lower elevation lands require pressure reducing valves. That's what these dots are. And these pressure reducing valves allow water to come in. So water is coming from the east and it's coming from the north into these areas, but it doesn't come back. So water can't come from these lower elevation lands to the lands west of Badger. So the only way to service these lands is through the Badger lands. So water needs to be extended through the Badger lands to get to these lands. And these lands are also very key to the development of the whole northwest area, because the sanitary sewer for the areas, for the lands west of Hogan Road and east of Carrot Creek actually need to come through these lands. So the sanitary is coming from the south. The water needs to come from the east. Ultimately, the water is going to come from the east, far to the east, far to the northeast, sorry, with the construction of a new reservoir. But in the interim, we need water to come through the Badger lands. So the development of these lands, which are key to the development of the northwest St. Albert, in order to be reasonably serviced at a reasonably cost, and I think it's about $1.2 million. That would be the additional servicing costs for these lands if they were, because that developer of those lands would need to extend a water main through a solar farm in order to do the urban development. Typically, you want to have contiguous growth, and you don't want to have that type of a situation. But if we were to develop a solar farm, which is essentially a rural type development within an urban area, it would not extend those services at a lower cost to the land. So say in summary, it would increase the servicing costs of the land to the west and to the northwest annexation area. So we haven't included site remediation costs in those cost estimates, and we haven't included offsite levy costs. And a commercial solar farm would also require an MUC. We expect the cost for an MUC would be much less than what was talked about last year. I think we had $400,000 per year. That was for a full MUC with 5 lines of business. If we're just talking about a solar farm only in the city of St. Albert's, the sole owner, we expect that we can use the city council as the board, and it would cost about $50,000 to do an MUC that would be specific to the city of St. Albert for the solar farm. We don't expect a lot of decisions. After the decision to proceed, there's really not a lot of decision making that goes into the solar farm as long as we're maintaining ownership. We don't expect a lot of day-to-day governance issues to come up. This would be an annual report to council as acting as the board for the St. Albert owned MUC. So. There are additional risks. The capital costs could end up even being higher than what we've expected due to further cost escalations. The AUC public engagement could also result in further cost escalations. There's the risks of vandalism, extreme weather events, and as well as maintenance issues, like we've seen with some of our rooftop solar. Some of those issues can also reduce the production at the facility, in addition to having some unexpected costs. Fowler Way is expected to be elevated in the future with a potential interchange at the Ray Given Drive intersection. This would particularly affect the west end of the site and may require relocation of a portion of the solar farm when that is in fact constructed. It could also reduce the solar farm production from a portion of the solar farm due to the shade from an elevated Fowler Way. There's also the risk of legislative changes, and one example was a decision by the AUC regarding DCG credits, and that DCG credits were distribution connected generation credits. It was effectively Fortis and NMAX and a few other of the distributing companies, the distributors, were collecting money, and they were providing money to distributed connected generation directly because they were reducing the transit, because those facilities are reducing the transmission costs to customers. So they were instead collecting distribution DCG credits, and they were providing that to those type of generators, and that actually it would have provided an additional $30 million of revenue to this project. So when the decision was made in June of 2027, it effectively removed $30 million from the business case for a commercial solar farm. Oh, sorry, I'm just getting some feedback there. There is a risk that between existing proposed solar farms and rooftop solar installations, there could be too much solar in Alberta. This is part of the reason that long-term PPA pricing for electricity produced from solar farms has not been increasing. And this is just, again, looking at that economic analysis again. Other solar farm options that we could consider. We could consider a commercial solar farm in conjunction with remediation of the salt impacted soils. We should be able to get grant funding for the remediation. This would allow the remainder of the site to be developed as higher value urban lands. However, the IRR would be considerably lower for this option than for option 1, and there would still be issues with offsite levy and higher utility servicing costs for the neighboring lands. We could consider the commercial solar farm with a reduced size, say take it down to the 4.9 megawatts AC, specifically on the northern portion of the site, along with remediation. This would allow the remainder of the site to be developed as higher value urban lands. However, the IRR would be expected to be considerably lower for this option than for option 2, because now we'd be carrying the cost of remediation along with the project. We could also consider an MUG solar farm with battery storage. We haven't fully explored battery storage, so the electricity produced would be able to match the consumption at St. Albert's facilities. However, from a back of envelope analysis, this would be expected to increase the capital cost. We think by at least 50% for the project, and the life expectancy for these large scale batteries is approximately only 10 years right now. So it's expected that the city of St. Albert would be able to procure green electricity through the procurement of long-term contracts for electricity and the purchase of RECs at a lower cost than what a small MOUG solar farm with battery storage would be able to provide. So it's expected that none of the solar farm options would provide a financial advantage over urban development of the land, even if remediation of the salt impacted soils is required in order to develop. And it's expected that no solar farm option would actually provide a financial advantage over simply maintaining ownership of the Badger lands without remediation of the salt impacted soil. So what I'm talking about here is the current public operations and engineering uses of the site. So what administration is proposing is sort of a clean slate for the site, other than Fowler Way, and we have to consider the existing salt impacted soils. And the administration will need time to gather input from the multiple departments before a recommendation regarding the disposition or preferred alternate uses of the Badger lands can be made. The relocation of the existing public operations and engineering activities at the Badger lands would need to be considered, as well as the timing for such relocation. And one of the challenges with determining the future uses is that the Badger lands are actually within 2 separate area structure plans. So it's recommended that the proposed future uses for the Badger lands align with both the North Ridge area structure plan and the ongoing St. Albert West area structure plan. So that concludes the presentation, and I guess I'll open it up to some questions.
Thank you, Regan. I'll just start with, that was a fantastic presentation.
Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. What we would expect from you and all the staff at the city. You've done your due diligence on this, and for anyone watching at home, I think it really makes a lot of sense where the conclusions came from. So I really appreciate the clarity and the work that you put into this. Now, you said we've got pivotal research here, we've got ACO, and we have Boost. So are they just here to answer questions?
That is correct.
Okay, so just so you know, Council, you could ask questions of Regan or any one of the consultants from Pivotal, ACO, or Boost. So I'm going to open it up now. Go ahead, Mike. Sorry, Councillor Killick.
Mike is fine. Regan, thanks very much for all of the work in detail, scenarios that you work through. You know, it was a lot on your plate, and you certainly provided a lot of good information, a lot of clarity, and I think council and our residents should say a big thank you to you. It couldn't have been easy to sift through all of this information and come up with the recommendation that we not proceed, because I think there was a lot of pressure that this was going to be a silver bullet, if not a golden bullet, to help us generate revenue and potentially lower taxes. So thank you for, you know, the due diligence and getting us to this point today. Just a couple of questions in terms of the MSA giving, I think it was forbearance on some of these small solar farms that are overproducing on an hourly basis. And that goes against the rules, basically. Now that we know that is a case, would it be likely that we would be approved to also get forbearance on that? It's kind of like the guys that did it first kind of made a mistake and they get forbearance and forgiveness, but now you know you can't go into it even if you wanted to. And would that be risky for us to even think of taking that approach? So
through the chair to Councillor Killick, I think we could assume that they would treat us in a similar manner, but that forbearance notice was specific to the AMSP funding. So it would be if there were perhaps say another round of AMSP funding, but we would not, the commercial solar farm as it was proposed would not be able to be compliant with that forbearance because of the size, right? So we're over we're about 3 times the size of that 5 megawatts. So which was the limit for the forbearance notice. So
okay, the other question I noticed in some of the spreadsheets, we went through them pretty quickly, but it showed like 35-year PPAs and 35-year payback numbers, and yet most PPAs I think are in the range of 10 to 15 years. And I guess the other piece of that is that the panels are only guaranteed by the manufacturer for either 20 to 25 years, and it would almost seem unrealistic that we would expect a PPA purchase agreement with anybody to extend 30 or 35 years for that reason alone. And could we even guarantee power when the guarantee on the or warranty on the panels is typically only 25. So it kind of, we really kind of stretched the boundaries of trying to make this thing pay, and yet it goes even beyond what normal business practice is. Is that correct? Or
I think that's, I would agree with you, Councillor Killick. It's part of the reason for the 30-year PPA that as it was proposed is until we have that debenture paid off, there's a risk, right? So in the initial analysis, or the previous analysis that was presented last year, we were looking at a 12-year PPA, which is more typical. But then we were looking at actually getting higher electricity pricing for the remaining years, right? But there's a risk there. Here, we can't afford to take that risk because we've got debenture payments to make every year. So we need to have stability in the pricing. So that was the thought by Boost of a 30-year PPA to match to match what the debenture borrowing would be. So.
okay,
And you're correct that you're correct. That's not typical, but 35 years is about the expected life of the solar panels, and I do think that that's a reasonable expected life. It's possible we could get 40 years, but we have seen warranties for about 25 years, and that's how the panels themselves. We know the inverters. We do not expect the inverters would last 35 years.
Right.
So.
Right. Yeah, inverters are like 10 years or something, I think. But anyway,
10, yeah. 10 to 20 years. Yes. Yes.
Technical details
Sure.
here today. Again, I would just say this was seen as such a, potentially great opportunity, and but giving you the time to do the due diligence has, I guess, got us to the right place. And
Let's save that for debate.
Yeah, I appreciate it.
Councillor Hughes.
Thank you. Just a couple questions. Regan, just before I start, that was probably the best presentation I've seen in 9 years. So thank you. It was extremely well done, as Mayor Heron said. So if you said if we don't remediate that land, what could we still use it for? Obviously residential is out, but if we didn't remediate the land, is it pretty much anything but residential?
So maybe I'll just jump in on that, and maybe I think our environment group is likely on the call as well. But to start off with, we had some actually very similar contamination. We had some salt impacted soils at the Jackcraft site, and we chose not to remediate until we actually built on the exact site of the salt impacted soils. So that was the trigger, right? So. And when we did that development at that time, we chose to remove as much of the salt impacted soil as we could, but we weren't able to remove all of it. So the remainder that was left in the ground, we've just been doing a long-term monitoring program on it.
So we could build anything but residential potentially on there, especially certainly if we remove all the dirt, anything's optional.
Well, the only reason that I discount residential is because residential is not land that the city owns. I would actually recommend that we maintain ownership of the land unless we're planning to remediate. If we're remediating the land, that actually could open it up to residential. So without remediation, I would say we would want to hold on to the land. So.
Okay. The other question was the 50,000 for the MEC. So I'm trying to figure out how that comes to play, because I understand the governance would be this way, but there's still cost to maintaining the solar, just like cleaning all the panels, there's accounting, there's other things that are involved. So does that include it in the 50,000, or is that, because I realize you're not doing an MEC business case right now. So I'm not asking you to go through great details. I'm just trying to figure out the 50 and what we're missing here.
Through the chair to Councillor Hughes, that is over and above the operations and maintenance costs. So I think there was about 100,000 a year in O&M costs. This is the governance costs that are over and above that. So, that does not include, and I think we had some administration costs in addition to the O&M costs that were included in Boost model.
Okay, so that wasn't including all the stuff to do the MEC that was above it. The other question I had, the 13+ million that you recommended, if it was to proceed, would be another $13 million in borrowing, but that didn't include the offsite levies. And I think that last year the offsite levies when it was discussed was 9.8 million. So I'm just wondering why we were not recommending to include the borrowing cost of the offsite levies. Like the recommendation is 13.3, but really it should be 23.3 more million if we're going to include the offsite levy costs.
St. Albert City Council has the option of making these lands exempt from offsite levies or making solar farms in general exempt from offsite levies. There are certain lands that are exempted from paying offsite levies. One of them is a municipal reserve land does not pay offsite levies. Stormwater management facilities also do not pay offsite levies. So we have the ability to say, you know what, solar farms don't pay offsite levies. But there's some considerations. There would be an impact to the offsite levies program overall, because that program has assumed that these lands would be developed as urban lands and they would contribute towards that offsite infrastructure that's benefiting. Actually, these specific lands, infrastructure has already been constructed to benefit these lands. Those costs would then be transferred to other developers and their offsite levies would go up. So, and I think it was closer to $8 million is what we had calculated. Okay. And it would be even less if we were to say designate some of it as MR and designate some of it as a stormwater management facility. So that would reduce that. That was just, but the way the current offsite levy bylaw is written, solar farms are not exempt from offsite levies. So
okay, so unless we were to actually exclude it, we're looking at around and give ourselves a pass, so to speak. We'd be looking at 8 million. So really, if we were to say we're going to allow the offset levy program to continue as is and us contributing to it, we really need to increase that borrowing by 20 million, probably 21.
That is correct.
If we chose to do it that way.
Yes.
Obviously,
if you
that's not you.
Correct.
Okay, great. Thank you. That's it.
Thank you. Councillor Broadhead.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I certainly want to add my voice to the chorus saying that this was a fine report. Well done. And you know, when we ask our administration to look at options for creating revenue to our city, every time we do that, we need to do the deep due diligence to ensure that it meets the needs of our community. And this certainly met the criteria for a due diligence report, and I appreciate that. My question is around timing now. So we've got the Northridge ASP. We're working on the St. Albert West ASP. How long before we could really consider the harmonization between those two ASPs and what it would mean for the Badgerlands? Do you have any timeline on that?
So I had projected, sorry, through the chair to Councillor Broadhead, I had projected by Q2 next year, because it's going to take cooperation from a number of different departments in order to work through that. So I was thinking by Q2 next year we could have a plan in place. So.
All right, fair enough.
I think I had a report back to council by Q4. I think within the recommendations, I built in a report back to council by Q4. So.
Okay, fair enough. Thank you, Madam Mayor. I'll save the rest of my comments for debate.
Thank you. Councillor Hughes.
Thank you. I missed one question, came to my brain afterwards. And I'm happy to bring forward these motions if you want me to.
I've already got 2 people who want to do it.
All right, well, it's fine. So the motion number 3, I'm not sure if it's to you or to, I will look down here, but the motion number 3 about be directed to take no action in respect to any other council motion or portion of a council motion that references a specific future use of the Badgerlands, accepting a motion to give third reading to statutory plan that's still in effect. I don't know what that means. I don't know what the consequences of that action are. I know that we had a motion a coon's age ago about a portion of the land being designated for high school. I'm not sure if there's anything else, or is there, what else is this referencing? Is it just the high school lands?
Thank you, Councillor. There are actually a number of motions directing that. What we're proposing with option 3 is to essentially reset the bar at 0. Let us do the analysis, come back to you with options that you would then start to make the decision on, as opposed to, it just allows us to clear the slate and start looking at this with an unbiased eye.
Okay. Is it possible? Well, it's possible. What I'd love to see is just what the motions are that we're resetting. I understand the high school is one of them, but even if this is after the fact, just so that when this is brought forward in Q4, at least we knew what was being taken off what we took off the table. So that way, at least we can have that discussion about it. Because I'm still hesitant to take off that high school completely off of those lands. It's hard finding 10 acres of land available for high schools. And so that's my hesitancy. So I'd love to just actually know what other motions we're taking off the table right now with that. That's my challenge.
I'm just trying to figure, wasn't this in the agenda package? Yeah.
Was it specifically? Because
Yeah,
I missed it. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
You can tell me what page and I look down because I've been reading this little
Yeah.
guy.
And I don't remember a high school being in there.
I remember that Councillor McKay had a motion for the high school. And that's why. And that passed, that we allocate 10 acres or 10%, one or the other, I can't remember, towards a high school.
Trying to find
So,
it.
but am I missing it in here? And or we just don't have
It was
it?
one of the attachments.
Well,
Was it?
I'm just trying
Okay,
to-
well then I will go look
But-
for
one
it.
of the attachments of the, on the AR.
All right, I missed it somehow. Okay,
But I'll just jump in. That actually only went back to 2012. And the reason is because the database on the previous motions is only searchable back to 2012. So it would require a more exhaustive search to go previous to 2012. So
okay,
But there was no motion, I didn't think.
all right. I'm gonna dig this little puppy up, so at least I know what it is, and thank you for that.
All right, I have,
Mayor Herron, if I may just interject, there's another important thing here. Regan has pointed out that the database, like the actual searchable database, only goes so far back. It would take a more intensive search to be sure we had all the motions. So that was one factor in the reason why the motion was worded the way it is. But the other one is, and this goes to Councillor Hughes' point, we did not want to recommend to Council today to actually rescind any previous motions. That will come when the recommendation eventually comes through as to what administration recommends should be done with the Badger lands. Then it will be a lot more clear which previous motions need to be actually rescinded. We're not quite at that point today. So I think you just want to point out the reason why the wording is to take no action as opposed to rescind is because it's premature. We don't really know for sure which previous motions need to be rescinded, partly because we're not sure we found them all. We found all the ones we know back to 2012, but there've got to be some before that. So if that helps.
Okay, that all makes sense. Thank you very much for that.
all right, I had because Councillor Jolly's not in chambers, she can't put her request to make a motion. So she's sent me a message that she's willing to do it and Councillor McKay wants to do it. So does it matter? Councillor Jolly, do you want to? I don't know which one of you came first.
Yeah, for sure. I'd like to. That
Okay,
works.
go ahead. Yep.
Okay. The portion of council motion AR 21-280 passed on June 21, 2021 that grants council approval for project charter ENV 004 for 26.1 million be rescinded. That the motion passed by council on June 21, 2021 to give first reading to bylaw 35, 2021 being a borrowing bylaw to design and construct a solar farm be rescinded. That administration be directed to take no action in respect to any other council motion or portion of a council motion that references a specific future use for the Badger lands, accepting a motion to give third reading to a statutory plan bylaw that is still in effect. That the first 135,000 of any unspent funds from the budget for project ENV 004 be uncommitted within the capital reserve, and any unspent funds in excess of the amount be uncommitted within the stabilization reserve. That administration review the potential uses for the South Badger lands, being that portion of the Badger lands 43 city annex lying south of future Fowler Way, and provide a recommendation by Q4 2023 for future disposition or use of the South Badger lands that is consistent with the Northridge Area Structure Plan. And that administration review the potential uses for the North Badger lands, being that portion of the Badger lands 43 city annex lying north of future Fowler Way, and provide a recommendation by Q4 2023 for future disposition or use of the North Badger lands that is consistent with the St. Albert West Area Structure Plan when a bylaw adopting that statutory plan is passed.
Ooh, well done. All right, I'll accept all of those unless anyone wants to split them, but I'm seeing no requests. So go ahead, Councillor Jolly. And
No,
I'll just-
I'll
sorry,
reserve my comments for closing. Oh,
okay, I'll just point out that number 2 in here is to rescind first reading of the boring bylaw, which is exact same motion when we get to 8.1. So we'll just skip over 8.1 if this passes. So, okay, so are you going to wait to close?
Yep.
All right.
I just have brief comments.
Anyone else have comments? Councillor Broadhead, go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. You know, it'll be interesting how this plays out in the community, but I want to encourage administration not to stop looking for new and innovative ways to bring revenue into our community. The fact that this one played out the way it does just indicates the due diligence administration is doing to make sure that those activities that we want to participate in actually pay dividends to the community. And I appreciate the due diligence in that respect. I want to encourage you to continue to look because if we don't try to be innovative, then we are by default left with the legacy ways of funding our community, which is fees and taxes. And we need to find new ways of doing that. And oftentimes we need to take a look at new and innovative ways. But at the same time, we want to make sure that we do it right. So thank you to administration and certainly support the motions.
Awesome. Councillor Hughes.
Thank you. I just really want to, I kind of briefed over Regan how important this report was. And when it came forward in February and it was said, we'll give you a analysis. And I remember I looked right at you and I said, you're gonna tell me the truth, right? And you did. Like, this is just absolutely blown me out of the water. Because politically it would have been easier just to try to pretend it would have been better than to acknowledge that it would not make us money at all. In fact, lose it, which has been my concern from the get-go for the past year. Many of the issues that were brought forward are new, and many of them, however, are not new. And the concerns that many people had in the community even 12 months ago were valid. And my concern was not that we looked for new revenue opportunities. I think that's a great idea. My concern was that we approved a project for it to move forward. We brought forward a boring bylaw. We had second and third reading put forward for the boring bylaw. It was refused to be rescinded for a boring bylaw for $33 million. And we now, upon looking at this, it's clear that they wouldn't have made us any money. And that's a very large concern for me. So I'm hoping that on all future relevant programs, that we actually do all the due diligence and really look at it very critically, as it was done with this report, before we start approving projects and having to rescind things, before we start doing boring bylaws and having to rescind them. And we can say this is just the order of events, but this is not the same as trying to build a capital project. We're looking at a fact of an order of events that we are doing revenue. And the boring bylaw was brought forward for second and third reading. This wasn't just casually brought out. And then from public outcry, I feel that it was delayed. There were assumptions about power pricing that would increase in the previous models. I think that these were much more stable of what you're predicting. And also the fact that recognizing that the power pricing for solar is not increasing like it would otherwise. Unfortunately, this council was not educated about how power pricing works. However, the more solar you have in the system, the more the on-demand pricing goes up as the solar is not reliable. So when solar doesn't work, the gap between what you need and what you have already producing increases. And because supply and demand work in a way, the more solar is not working that day, the more the demand pricing goes up. So it does not help solar, but it does help on-demand pricing, for example, natural gas that can rev up their generators. And so as a result, the predictions of the pricing that came forward to council last year were just not accurate. So I'm really, really grateful when I saw this report come in. I literally was almost in tears. I was so grateful to see that it actually was not coming forward to recommend that we had to do this and we had to question assumptions and really, really look at this. What came forward was very thorough, is very, I think, very realistic. And we have to realize that if this was to move forward, that the pricing that was offset was not wrong by 26 million, but closer to 50 when you included offsite levies. And the borrowing bylaws that were brought forward and the assumptions that were made last year were for interest rates that were several percentages less than what they are today. And they could increase even more before this project would have been actually completed. And none of those discussions were even on the table last year. So was the due diligence done this time? Yes. And I'm extremely grateful for the leadership that brought forward and had the courage to bring this forward and admit that this is not the right path to go down. Yes. But we also have to take responsibility of the fact that we were approving projects before this level of due diligence was done, and there was no necessity to approve those projects until this level of due diligence was done. So I will be very relieved to vote no, or to vote in favor of this and to stop this from moving forward. But I think that the order and how we are doing things and investigating alternate revenue sources needs to change. And we should not be putting the public thinking that they would have no say in a borrowing bylaw because second and third reading were passed or were delayed in August. The public didn't know what the results were going to be until it came out on Wednesday. And neither did we till that week either. If the debt recommendation had been different, the public really would have had almost no warning that this was going to come down. And that also is a little disturbing. Actually, it's very disturbing. So Regan, you banged it out of the park. Mr. Hiltz and Mr. Fletcher, thank you for your leadership and saying that we should tell everybody what's actually happening and recommend to council this should not go forward. And I really do thank you for all of this work on this. It was very, very well done. Thank you.
Councillor Mackay.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I want to add my congratulations as well for the in-depth quality report and additional analysis and additional study that went into the findings today and the recommendations today. So kudos and thank you very much. But I also want to point out that for me, the process actually worked. I actually have confidence in the I even have more confidence today in our project management processes than I had when this all started, because I was always aware that there was a number of decision gates that were available to council. And this just proves one of them today. We have phase 3 that required everything we heard today, every bit of analysis that went into the fantastic progress report or that arrived at the recommendations was anticipated in phase 3, what we agreed to August of last year. So I think this diligence and adherence to sound project management principles really has brought us to the appropriate decision in front of us today. So I will be supporting it. And while I'm disappointed that an opportunity, even Ernst & Young in their operational and fiscal review actually recommended that we need, as a municipality, as a city, we need to identify additional sources of revenue because we're not going to be able to get it from the province. We're not going to be able to get it continually by going to the taxpayer. We need to find it. So I'm disappointed that this opportunity didn't work out, but I'm not disappointed in the process. I'm actually celebrating the process. This worked, and we are here today making a proper decision based on the anticipated and proper analysis. So again, congratulations to Mr. Regan, to the consultants. I mean, our world has changed. You could see that. You could see the capital costs were going up. You could see that the IRR was not going to be positive in our favor. So why would we proceed? We always knew that we needed revenue. This identified that this was not the right avenue. And like Council Broadhead has always soundly identified, I hope this doesn't discourage us other opportunities on behalf of administration and even on council. We need to find additional revenue. This one unfortunately didn't work out, or fortunately didn't work out because of we've seen that pitfalls at each one of the different options. But I mean, every one of those options and even additional options were investigated, but nothing was there for us. Now there's an opportunity to actually look at what we can do with the Badgerlands that even opens up maybe another door that we thought was closed to us before, but now we see that even that price wasn't a barrier anymore. So congratulations. I'm obviously going to support the recommended motions. And that ends my comments, Madam Mayor.
Thank you. Councillor Killick.
Thank you. Yeah, Reagan, I think you're the point man. And a lot of people have said thank you to you. But I am pretty darn sure there's a big team behind you. And that whole team needs to be recognized. I'm sure no one in city administration I've learned is a one-man band. And so I congratulate you and the broad team that all worked so hard on this to bring this information together. It just goes to prove that solar business with regulatory changes coming at us even as late as a couple of weeks ago, complexity of the business itself and cost escalations, technology changes can just play out in so many ways. This is an incredibly complex business to get into. And when you do the deep dive analysis, unfortunately, this just didn't work out for us. But I still want to focus that rooftop solar is a viable alternative. So I expect to see some other new capital projects potentially and opportunities as we go forward in the solar environment, just in a much more simpler direction. So we're not giving up on solar. We're just not going ahead with this particular proposal. And I am very excited in what's next for the Badgerlands, and we'll be bringing something forward in that regard in the near future. But I think that as a standalone opportunity, future business opportunity for Badgerlands may in itself be a potential way to offset costs and generate revenue. So I'm excited for that opportunity coming forward, and obviously be supporting all these motions.
Councillor Bermansky.
Thank you through the mayor to Reagan and administration. I do want to thank you as well for the exceptional report presented. Doing your due diligence in the final hours when it's most important was duly appreciated by council, I'm sure members of the city. So I will be supporting this motion. And again, congratulations on exceptional report at this time.
All right, it's up to you to close it up, Councillor Jolly.
Thank you. So very briefly, administration's change of recommendation really demonstrates their exceptional professionalism in terms of their ability to identify the tremendous change in the environment that we've seen over the last couple of years. Anyone who is building anything knows that a project approved however long ago would have been approved in an environment that's very different from the one that we face now. I'd also like to acknowledge that one of the benefits of completing the public engagement for this project means that we can really clearly see that priorities of residents are shifting to a desire for decreased reliance on fossil fuels, increased security from having a local energy source, reduced environmental impact, and just even the improved perception of St. Albert as a green community. So in the presentation, Regan mentioned this concept was never intended to reduce our carbon footprint, but I would argue that it should have. So as Councillor Broad had mentioned, admin's commitment to innovation is applauded, and I'm excited to see it continue. Thank you to administration, to all residents for their participation in exploring this opportunity. And for me, the knowledge that we gain through this process is really going to help us make great decisions in the future. So thank you. That's all I have.
All right, call for the vote. Oh, sorry, vote is closed and that passes unanimously. Okay, which means we can skip over 8.1 because it was already voted on in the previous.